If your illustrations are looking kinda meh, in this video I'm gonna teach you 5 tips that you can instantly apply to your next illustration so that it looks much better. What's up guys, Lucas here, I'm a concept artist and illustrator, and this channel is all about art and art related content, so if that's something that you like, consider subscribing. In this video I'm gonna share you step by step how I made this illustration right here, and I am also gonna share with you 5 tips that I use in every single one of my illustrations that make my life much easier. Let's get started with step number 1, and that is planning. Every illustration needs some planning, and it depends on how complex your illustration is. You're going to plan a little bit more or a little bit less. In my case, I knew that my illustration was just going to have one single character and probably a very loose background, so it didn't require a lot of planning, but still I took time to make some sketches for the pose of my character. It is a terrible idea to just go with the first thing that comes out of your mind, so at least dedicate some time to make 2 or 3 options. In this case, I knew that I wanted Starfire, the character from my illustration, to look dynamic. I didn't know exactly which pose I was going to go through, so I started just sketching some random poses. I know it can be pretty tough to come up with poses just out of your mind, so a couple of suggestions that I have is looking for photo references, or also getting yourself a little figurine like this one that I have in here, and this is what I use for this specific pose. You don't have to get a figurine like this, although you can find them online for very cheap. You can also use 3D models that are free online for you to just sketch the shape of your character, or some softwares like Clip Studio Paint have some 3D models inside the software for you to pose your characters. It is important that you know that you don't have to come up with a completely different pose. Like you can see in here, the third pose is the second pose with simply different legs. So if you like one part of your character or pose or illustration, you don't have to get rid of everything. You can reuse this part and put it together with some other things that you might like. After having a rough pose that I liked, it was time for me to just make it Starfire. This part was really simple. I just took the rough sketch that I had and I started just erasing it and drawing over it until I had something that looked like the character I was actually drawing. I find that drawing characters like superheroes that don't have very flowy or thick clothes can be easier when you're going from the sketch of the gesture onto the final character, because the clothes don't change the silhouette of your character, so that is a bonus in this case. Now that I had a pose that I like for my character, I needed to plan the rest of the composition. If your illustration is very complex, I recommend that you go through values, but in my case, just going through color was enough. I made a very sketched out version of the background and I slapped some base colors on my character. Now this is the start of something that is called a color thumbnail, and it is a very small version of your illustration. When you're doing this part, make sure that you're making your illustration very small inside your canvas, because if you start zooming in, you're going to start polishing things, and now that you see it up close, you can see how rough it is. I'm not staying in the lines and a lot of the colors are just mixed between different parts of my character. But none of that matters, because what you want is just a general impression of the finished illustration. Now we are not done with the planning, but I'm gonna give you the secret number 2, and that is value contrast. Can you see how in the thumbnail I'm leaving a bit of a lighter spot behind my character? It is not by chance that I'm leaving this light part behind the head of my character, because if we put this into values, the part of the highest contrast, that means the part that has the lightest values against the darkest values, is going to be the part where the audience or the viewer is going to see the illustration first. Normally you want that part to be the face of your character, so that is what I wanted to do in this case. Here the values are starting to work, but there is still something that I can do to make my character stand out more, and that is to increase that value contrast. Sure, the head of my character is standing out a little bit more than the rest, but we can do the same thing with the body, and that is something that we can do very easily with another layer in multiply mode attached to our character. Once I turn it on, you can see how much more contrast my character has now against the background. Now the colors of the illustration already started looking interesting, but we can make it better, and I wanted Starfire's hair to glow and become a source of light for the rest of the character. So I decided to slap a rim light that would come from the direction of the hair towards the rest of her body. Again, you can do this from your imagination, but I decided to use the same figurine that I had here on my desktop. You can see this is how the figurine looked for the pose of the character, and all I did is I put a light on the side of the character to see where would the character receive light on her body. With that photo as a reference, it was very easy for me to plan the glows on my character. I added a new layer with the glow of her eyes, and another one with the power from her hand. The character was almost all in shadow, so I slapped another layer, this one is in screen mode, for me to find some cool highlights around her body. With all of that done, my color thumbnail was finished. And you can see that when I zoom out, indeed, this looks like the final illustration. This is what you want out of your color thumbnail, and you have no idea how much time it can save you if you have your whole illustration planned before you even start the real thing. Before we go to secret number 3, this is a good moment to tell you that this and all of my illustrations I made with my LP painting brushes, they are about to drop, and by the moment that you watch this video they might have already been in my store and you can get them in the link in my description. But if you're watching this just before they drop, you have an opportunity to get not only the PSD of this illustration, but also the real-time recording of the full illustration together with some free brushes from my LP painting pack and some mystery bonuses that are gonna drop together with the brushes. All you have to do to get all of these bonuses is join the waiting list for my LP painting brushes, and that's it. You're gonna get all of these things sent to your mail. Now let's go back to the video. Tip number 3 is reuse, don't restart. For so many of my illustrations, I had made the mistake of making a little color thumbnail and then restarting my whole illustration. I have no idea how I didn't think about this before, but you can just simply grab your color thumbnail and make it bigger, and you're going to have your illustration already halfway there. You just have to polish it. This is what I did with this starfire illustration. I just brought all the layers that I use for the color thumbnail and enlarged them to fit the real scale of my illustration. The layers are all very similar. I have the line art of my character, but this time the opacity is a little bit reduced so that I can focus on the painting. Then I have all of my base colors, this time with the selections done a little bit cleaner. The same shadow layer that shines for my character, and also the glow coming from her hair. Here are the glows for her eyes, medallion, and also her hand. And the only difference is that I added a couple more layers of shadow to make my character a little bit more interesting. You can see how it looked before and after. I didn't even change the layer of the background. It is exactly the same background. I just added a little bit of a blur so that it makes my character stand out even more. I told you I was lazy with backgrounds. This brings us to secret number 4, and this is more of a mindset secret instead of a technical secret that you can apply to your illustration, and it is the 80-20 rule. Now I know that you have heard this 1,000 times because it applies to a lot of things in life, not only illustrations, but it is a fact that 80% of your illustration, most of it, is going to be done in just 20% of the time that it takes to make that illustration. And this is this moment. By then I had spent very little time in my full illustration, but if you are to zoom out and compare it with the final one, it is extremely similar. All the changes from this one to the final one took me 5 times more effort and time than what took me to bring it from nothing, a white canvas, until this stage. It is very important for you to remember this because a lot of times I see illustrations that are not polished or pushed until the end just because the artist doesn't realize that most of the work is going to be in the small details of the illustration. There is no problem if you're an artist that prefers to leave their illustrations rough like this one. But if you really want to take it to the final stage and make sure that it looks good up close, you have to accept that it's going to take 5 times the effort that it took you to make the rough one. And let's talk about secret number 5, and this is one that drives me crazy that people are not talking about it more, and that is post-production in your illustration. Post-production is the difference between your illustration going from here to here, and it is not a big change, but if you see the illustration up close, you can see more of a difference from one to another. The way that I want you to think about this is that your illustration is a bit like a photo. It's alright to just post it like that, but you can really take it to the next level if you take a moment to add a little bit of post-production, a couple of effects, a little bit of color manipulation to make your illustration really stand out. And although the post-production on this particular illustration was kinda subtle, I have had many illustrations in which putting that post-production really makes a difference between a painting that I like and one that I don't. And I'm gonna show you layer by layer what I mean with post-production so that you can apply it to your illustration. Some of these things you can only do in Photoshop, but a lot of them you can also do in Procreate or even Clip Studio Paint. The first layer, and it's the difference between this and this, is just doing a tiny bit of liquify and overpaint on some things, like for example the effect that she has on her hand. Then I sometimes like to add a sharpen effect that makes the illustration go from this blurry one to this one right here. These three are very subtle, but sometimes I like to add some color effects like color lookup, vibrance, and curves to make my illustration a little bit punchier. And this last one in here is a color dodge effect that I like to add sometimes, especially when I'm going for that Ross Dross type of style. And there you go, every step of my illustration from start to finish, plus 5 tips that you can apply instantaneously in your next character illustration. Again, don't forget that you can get all of my brushes in the link in the description, and if you're watching this before my LP painting brushes release, you can get the Photoshop file, the real-time recording, and some free brushes plus some mystery gifts if you go and sign up for the waiting list of my brushes before they drop. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.